Thank you, Bill, and thank all of you. It's an honor to be here. A lot of good friends, a lot of new faces, but it's really all family to me. That's what y'all are. That's what we are. The person, of course, I really owe my longest thanks to is my mom. None of this, with whatever has happened to me in my life, and the person that I hope I've turned out to be would not have been possible without my mom, who I'm fortunate to have still alive. She'll be 90 this coming year. I am blessed. I know how lucky I am, and whatever good things have come to me because I listened and was not reluctant to do so. My life has actually been very linear. Many of you know I'm from a very small town in Alabama, and I was born in 1950, so of course it was a rather tumultuous time in this country, in that region of the country. And my mom's rules to my sister, who was 2 years older, and myself, it was just the three of us, I didn't have a dad, were pretty simplistic, and they have literally stayed with me to this very moment, and many of them have been my guiding principles. And they were the following. Most important of all for my mom, because when we left our house, and the environment that we were in was so negative. There was just constant hate thought, hate speech, hateful deeds. That word, my mom stressed from day one that there was no hate. You couldn't say the word hate in our house. You weren't allowed to hate the weather. You couldn't hate vegetables. You just couldn't use that word in a fleeting, I hate that. Gosh, I hate that. There was no hate. And this was drilled into us. You may not like something, but there's no hate. At least not in the house, because when you left the house, there was plenty of hate. And that the house had to be a place of tranquility, and quietude, and most importantly of all, it had to be a place of love, and that where you can speak freely, but it was a place of love and trust and comfort. And last but not least, of course, was just the simple idea that there were manners. Yes, ma'am, no, sir, please, thank you. If somebody gave you a gift, or got a birthday gift, I had to write a thank you note before I went to bed. And I had to write it because she sat there until I finished it and put the stamp on it, so it was going out in the mail the next day. It wasn't, I'll do it tomorrow morning. It was none of that. It was, you do it before you go to bed. So it was pretty simple growing up in that environment within the home. My epiphany that I think set me on this path that I have enjoyed to this moment came when I was 7, when I saw a racially motivated act that culminated in a fatality. It was horrifying. It was traumatic, because I've seen it every day in my mind since. I saw adults, men, display the worst possible and violent possible behavior. It was awful. And at that moment, everything that my mother had been talking about coalesced to me. It was clear. I knew she was right, that you had to have manners, you couldn't say hate and all those things. But what happened virtually in front of me coalesced into, I realized what she was talking about was correct. This was the result of bad behavior, bad thoughts, and hateful speech and hateful deeds was this terrible act. And at that moment, at the young age of 7, I didn't know about human rights. I would be quite a liar if I said I knew about human rights, but I knew about civil rights. They had been going on for marches. I knew who Reverend King was. I knew at that moment that I wanted to go down this road and work for a society that just did not have that terrible human behavior in it. I wanted to live and work in a world of ideas and ideals that could get beyond such terrible acts, thoughts, and deeds. And that is what I dedicated myself to doing. Well, as I came through the 50s and into the 60s, you all remember how turbulent and disturbing America was in general, and the South in particular. Such terrible, terrible violence from the church bombings in Birmingham, snipings, shootings, the murder of 3 civil rights workers in Mississippi, the assassination of Malcolm X in New York. The country was berserk in violence, not just the South. And of course, all of that played against the backdrop of what was becoming this foreign policy nightmare known as the Vietnam War. And as I reached the mid-60s, it was in high school, 65, 66, the war was out there looming. We had veterans already coming back in 66 and 67. And I realized, of course, I was going to turn 18 in 1968. I had to know what I was going to do with the draft when that was coming. I had to be prepared. And in 1968, I went to George Washington University in D.C. And D.C., of course, that was only 3 blocks from the White House, and all the tumultuousness of anti-war demonstrations started virtually the month I got there. I went there in June of 1967. I was still 16 years old. I turned 17 over the summer. I was a little young to start school. I went there. There were anti-war marches. The school was only 3 blocks from the White House. It certainly was not the beautiful campus that SMU is. You could walk right through GW and never even know you were at a university. It just looked like whatever didn't belong to GW would go down and build. And there was demonstrations and marches and protests. In the spring of 68, of course, Reverend King was killed. And cities erupted in violence. Certainly D.C. did. I went up to the roof of my dorm, and I remember we were 9 stories up. You could see the White House 3 blocks away. You could see D.C. burning. You could hear the police and ambulance and fire sirens. Planes in those days were allowed to fly over the city, and you could hear gunfire, not just in D.C., but you could people shooting at airplanes. It was perverse. Perverse. And then in June, 2 months later, Senator Kennedy was killed. You all remember these terrible years of that year of 68. Well, in July, I had to go to my draft board and register. And I registered as a conscientious objector. And I'll never forget, the guy at my draft board was a World War II veteran. I have great respect for people who are in the military and who put themselves in harm's way and fought for this country and still fight for this country and make it possible for me to enjoy many of the freedoms I still have. But the military was not for me. The country gave me the right to have an option to that choice of service. And I'll never forget when I turned 18 and went to register. Went down to my draft board, and the guy that was taking my information was a World War II vet. And, I had long since been known from this little town I was in as just being that kind of guy. Not a real American, just somebody who felt differently and believed differently. And I remember he got so mad. I remember I thought his veins were going to pop out of his neck when I was registered. He was talking through his jaw, through clenched teeth. And ultimately, he was so so outraged at me that he spit on me. When I turned 18, he was screaming at me. I thought he was going to have a stroke. He was so mad. And he spit on me and told me to get out of his sight with a lot of other choice words thrown in. I remember my 18th birthday. I mercifully never had another birthday like it. I thought every birthday after that had to be better than being spit on in the name of love of country. I kept telling him I had the same love of this country that he did, but maybe just in a different way. In 1968-69, my sophomore year, I was fortunate enough to go to Paris and study a year abroad in Paris at the Sorbonne. And of course, Paris had been shut down by strikes when the whole city was closed when I got there. It's like, where is it? Can I go somewhere where there's not tumultuousness, violence, and political craziness? I went 4,000 miles from D.C. and the city of Paris was closed. And everywhere we went in Europe, it was a very tumultuous and political year. I went right after Labor Day, and in August, the month right before I left, you may remember the Russians invaded Czechoslovakia. And so all of Europe was very tense with Russian troops in Prague. Well, at Christmas, the school took the 23 Americans on this exchange program. They took us to Vienna, Prague, and both Berlins. And I had been to Europe before, so much of this was quite eye-opening to me, as you can imagine. I was 18 and a half years old. And on January 16th, 1969, when we were in Prague, I was at Wenceslas Square. I went up with two friends of mine. We laid a wreath to the people who had been killed the preceding August. And lo and behold, right behind us, no more than from me to you, 15 feet away, 10, 15 feet away, you may remember the incident of a young 21-year-old Czech medical student by the name of Jan Pollock. He was a 21-year-old student who set himself on fire in protest of the Russian occupation of his country. And it happened virtually 15 feet from me. And I remember it because the day was very dark, very cold, a typical winter's day. It was almost dark, and it was only 2 o'clock, 2:30 in the afternoon. And all of a sudden, there was this massive ball of light, and we turn around, and there's a human being on fire. I had seen pictures of this, of course, in the New York Times with monks doing this in Vietnam, but there was a human being right there, burning to death. I was beyond traumatized. It was horrible. I would like to say I had forgotten it, but I can't. I see it every day. I don't want to, but I do. I was so traumatized that by the time they got all of us back to Paris, I just was not ready mentally to sit in a classroom. So I asked my teachers if I could just take a little time and go by myself, and I went to the British Isles. And that is where I heard about Amnesty International. I saw a flyer on a pole, and that is the first time I heard about human rights as an organization. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Here's my whole philosophy in an organization dedicated to exactly what I believed in. I went immediately to their offices and I tried to join. They laughed at me. And you're not a British citizen, but we're coming to the States. I hope we get to where you are. So I knew that there was such a thing as human rights, and I realized that I could work for with a human rights organization on a wide range of issues, which I believed in. Lest you think I had good fortune after I left London, I tried to go to Ireland and Northern Ireland, and it was the exact week that the British sent troops to Northern Ireland. I know it sounds like you can make this up, but I don't want to say that I was marked, but I really began to have suspicions when I tried to cross the border and go into Northern Ireland, and British troops put me off to the side and threatened me with arrest and wanted to know lone American was going to Northern Ireland for. I'm like, well, sightseeing, I thought, but they did not see the humor of an American student trying to get to Belfast. So suffice it to say, I didn't quite make Northern Ireland in January of '69. It was an interesting year of tumultuousness, political violence. I was fortunate enough to travel all across Eastern Europe. Many of you know I take groups every December to Holocaust sites, and I started to go to sites in Poland and across Central Europe, Germany, France. I knew that I wanted to take people to sites related to the Holocaust because the Holocaust is the historical antecedents of the modern human rights movement. And I think that if anybody's going to try to understand modern human rights, we have to honor those who paid the ultimate price during the war and the Holocaust through no fault of their own, people who were targeted because of who they were and had the bad luck to be alive then and trapped in Eastern Europe. When I came home, I finished my 2 years in D.C. I got arrested a lot for protesting in D.C., nonviolent protests. I want to emphatically add that everywhere you went in D.C. in the last 2 years, you got arrested. You could go to the Capitol, you could go to the White House, the Washington Monument. It didn't matter where you went. But I got arrested a lot in nonviolent student protesting. My mother stopped asking me how I was enjoying school. She just, I don't know who was more anxious to get out of D.C., my mom for me or me. I won't go into the specific story, but many of you know that in one of those demonstrations in D.C., I got hurt. I got hit, shot by a police officer with some gas. Hence, these dark glasses are a result of an injury that I sustained in a police riot that occurred 4 days after the Kent State killing in May of 1970. The long and the short of it is, when I then came to SMU. When I came for law school and I stayed and got my master's, I was in Dallas in 71 and 74, and then went back home. I went to Harvard and got my doctorate there in history. And all of the while, the main issues to me, I did join Amnesty. They came to D.C. in 71, right before I graduated, and so I joined Amnesty in May, 2 weeks before I graduated. So it's been almost 41 years now, a long time. I was one of the few people, but not certainly the only person, but one of the few people in the early years of Amnesty that spoke out loudly and emphatically against the death penalty. I never believed that government killing people was anything other than killing. I've never seen governments who kill as justifiable in any way. So I became kind of known in Amnesty in its early years as somebody in the South that most people had never met that was speaking out about the death penalty. I came to SMU in 1985 and began the same kind of activism. I might say, again, this is, you couldn't make this up. But back in 1976, when I was a grad student at Auburn, on my birthday, July the 2nd, the last piece of item on the news, I was at my friend's house. They were getting ready to have a big birthday party for me. It was pouring down rain. We were watching the bicentennial events on the TV, on the tall ships in New York and Philadelphia and Boston harbors. And the last item on the news was that the U.S. Supreme Court decision in a court case known as Gregg versus Georgia re-legalized the death penalty in the United States. And everybody looked at me and looked at ourselves, and all of the fun and the joy of why people had gathered to commemorate a birthday with this big old shrimp Creole dinner just went flat. And that was literally the last time that I really celebrated my birthday. To me, my birthday is a day that my mother got rid of 10 pounds and 2 ounces. But to me, my birthday is really a day of national shame. It's a day of disgrace where this country decided that it was okay to kill people. So in 1983, when I was at Auburn, I wanted to start going to Poland. I knew that I had to start getting ready to take people to Poland. And I went in March, in the springtime. It was just too pretty. And I went again in 84, in August, and it was even prettier. I don't know what I was thinking. In January of 85, I came to SMU, and I told my mom, I'm going back to Poland, and I'm going in December. And she knew I had gone the other 2 times, and I'd only gone home at Christmas, and she looked at me and she said, what are you doing? It's enough, you've been there twice. What are you trying to prove? So I got to go. And I went in December of 85, it was about 30 below. I froze. It was so painful physically that when I had water, tears against my eyes, it was so cold. The teardrops froze to my face. I mean, it was painful. But I knew it was correct to be there. And I told her when I came back, you're never going to see me at Christmas again. I'll come home at Thanksgiving, but I just stopped going at Christmas. And I started going by myself every year. I was in the history department, and I was teaching courses in race relations, and I wanted to teach human rights courses. I was blessed with a great department chair who, when I proposed the course, said yes. I offered this in 1990, and I've been teaching that ever since. Very fortunate, very fortunate. In 1996, I decided the time had come, and I went with the first group to Poland. And we opened it up to anybody. It's still that way. It's open to any of you, anybody that wants to go. You don't have to be affiliated with SMU. And we started going to Poland every year. Well, in 2005, I'm a graduate student. I didn't know who Lauren Embrey was. To me, she was just a graduate student. I just had no idea as to who she was, nor the prominent family she belonged to. And she decided that she wanted to go to Poland. And she took her 2 sons. She took her son who was a junior at SMU and her son who was a junior in high school. And the 3 of them went. And unbeknownst to me, she had a transformative experience in Poland and in the camps. And I know that if anybody goes, they have such an experience. You couldn't go to these places and not have an experience like that. But I just didn't know that she came from a family and had the financial means to want to do something. And she contacted me in February of 06. Her sister lives in Colorado, and they came and we had a meeting with the 2 sisters and an attorney. And they sat across from me and were talking about giving this massive gift to the university to create a human rights program. I couldn't even believe what I was hearing. And they made a suggested figure, and they said, is that enough? If I had been thinking, I don't know what I was thinking. I was so shocked. I thought, yes, that's more than enough. But of course, if I had been thinking, I'd have said, hell no, it's not enough. But of course, I wasn't thinking like that. I know I never would have said such a thing, but in my heart, I wish I had. But they gave this gift to create the program. This was in February of 06. And they were so, I said to them immediately after we got up from the table, I waited my whole life. I never thought I would ever meet anybody who had financial means to support this pedagogy. And without batting an eyelash, she said to me, we've waited our whole life to do this. We never thought we'd ever meet anybody who was doing it that we could support. And I was more flattened. It was just a synergy. It was just a quirk. I didn't work with the development office. It was just a quirk. And they were so adamant. this program started so quickly that they wanted the program to start on July the 1st, 4 months later, 5 months later. And they asked me, would you be the director? Would I be the director? I said, let me call my mom. You talked about mom. Yes, I would be more than honored. And that is really the backstory of how the program came. And to me, it was the culmination of just one steady stream of life. I never wanted to be an astronaut. I didn't want to be anything other than what I ultimately got the opportunity to do, which is to work in a world of ideas and ideals in the university. Catherine Brunson said here, one of my former students, is the first person that ever graduated SMU with a human rights minor. She's sitting right there. In my grandiose vision, they kept saying, what do you want? What do I want? I want a major. I want a PhD. I want a lot for our students. And it is a tribute to the students. This program took off, not surprisingly to me. It attracted students like a moth to a flame. How could it not? You deal with 18, 19, 20-year-old people who want to make a better world just like I did, just like you did. We all want something better, idealistic. This was a norm to me. And this program, for the last 3 years at SMU, has been the fastest growing program in the entire university. If the dean were here, he would tell you that. We have over 200 students. We've graduated over 80 with a minor. And as Bill said in his gracious introduction, the university and the board of trustees accepted this as a major. It is only the 5th one in the country. The other 4 are either in New York, Connecticut, or Ohio. So literally, there's nothing like this south or west of Dayton. This is it. This doesn't exist at Harvard or Yale or Stanford or Duke or any other hooey-tooey school. To me, Harvard should be the SMU of the Northeast. Duke should be the SMU of North Carolina. Stanford should be the SMU of the Bay Area. It's beyond me how this major is not at every university, but every university is not my problem or concern. I'm blessed. I don't know how I could have it any better, because I get paid to be me. How much better can anybody have it? From listening to my mom say, no hate, to working with young people like Catherine, and colleagues and faculty members, and administration, and y'all, family, in your walks of life that I get to interact with to move the social conscience forward in this city and in this country. I'm the luckiest person I know. I know many of us may feel like that respectively, and I know I certainly do. The motto of our program is really a paraphrase of what my mother raised me about. It's really a tribute to my mom. The slogan associated with our program is, there's no such thing as a lesser person. And this to me is the crux of what human rights is. It recognizes that all people, whether they look like us, and the majority who don't, there is no except. There's no such phrase as, I'm all for human rights for everybody except. There's no except. There's no, I'm all for human rights except for gay people, except for Baha'is, except for Muslims, except for Jews, except. There's no except. And it's easy to work for human rights when the people on whose behalf you work are innocent people and have been run over by governments or because they're attacked in hateful crimes. It's easy to feel sympathy and to work with them and for them. And it's not so easy when you want to work on behalf of convicted violent felons and realize that this country shouldn't be killing people. And it's very difficult when you want to talk to American about people that they vote for and urging them to either not vote or to look deeper into either their hearts or the hearts of people who want to vote for, and trying to urge everyone to make human rights a central pillar of how we all interact with the world. Because ultimately, this being an election year, all of these issues come right back to us. We're all going to go to the polls in November, or at least have the option to go to the polls and vote. It's one of the great things about this country. Well, we already know one of the candidates. We don't know the other. And I know 99% of the people I know probably already know who they're going to vote for. And to me, I wish that everybody would make human rights a central, not a cause, but the cause. When I hear candidates in 2008, human rights never came up in the presidential campaign with the exception of Guantanamo. Obama promised he was going to close Guantanamo. McCain, of course, we can all respect that he was a torture survivor and a prisoner of war, whether you like his politics or not. We can all feel that he went through a terrible ordeal as a POW. He knows what it means to be tortured. He knows what torture is. But that was the only issue that came up in the campaign. Close Guantanamo. Nobody talked about rights for women. Nobody talked about gay rights at the time. Nobody talked about the death penalty because all the candidates were for it, even Obama. And so now here we are 4 years later. And clearly the economy is going to be a huge issue. And I dare say that no one is going to hear too much about human rights either from Obama or whoever his opponent is. Nobody's going to be talking about women's rights. I dare say not many people are going to bash Obama for dumbass don't tell. I'm curious as to what role human rights are going to play in this campaign. And I'll be startled if they play any. And to me, that is a tragedy. It's a national tragedy. It is a moral failing to our young people. We just don't talk about human rights. We don't have a culture of it yet. It's disgraceful. So I think, what does this mean to you and me? How important is this? Well, it was easy when Bush was president to rip into him because he had a terrible human rights record. And I'm sad to say that it is pretty much as easy to rip into this president because his record is poor. This president cannot say in good conscience, I am a friend of human rights when he supports the death penalty. Because you can't be good on human rights and support the death penalty. You just can't be. You just can't be. You can't say, I believe in women's rights and say, I want to support women's rights, but I'm okay to kill the 51 women on death row. Most of whom were battered or beaten in violent scenarios that they turned around and inflicted on their children. It doesn't make what they did acceptable. It just sees them as victims who acted out against their own children or against their batterer. You can't be good for women if you want to kill 51 women on death row. You can't be good on gay rights if you want to kill people who are on death row who are gay or lesbian. You don't get to pick and choose who you want to be supportive of. You either believe in human rights for all people, regardless of what they've done, or we don't. And sadly, we are in a country that is at least run by appointed or elected officials who more often than not want to pick and choose who they want to be supportive of. That may be many things, but it's not human rights. It's called selection. Well, the world had a different kind of selection in the 1930s and 40s. It was called Nazis on the Ram at Auschwitz. I'm not going to equate Obama or Bush with Nazis, but the idea that you get to pick and choose who you want to give the Pontius Pilate thumbs up or thumbs down to, this is not for us. Human beings are not gods. I would like to see some kind of ethical consistency from our president, whoever it may be. If it's Obama for 4 more years, I hope that he will be better on human rights than he has been. Why is it that this country is the only country in the world that hasn't signed the Convention on the Rights of the Child other than Somalia? And Somalia doesn't even have a government. They can't sign it. I mean, they physically can't sign it. There's no government there. But we can. It's painful. It's painful because we, in my opinion, we could and we should be so much further down the road, leading the world in an example of human rights consistency, and we hold ourselves back by pragmatic politicians that would stand up in front of an educated crowd like y'all and say, vote for me and I'll kill people for you, and people will stand up and applaud like they did for Rick Perry during the debate. What does this say about who we are? Or who do we think we are? Who do we aspire to be? I mean, the reality is that who Americans think they are is a far cry from the reality of who we really are. We have an inflated, really good pat on the back. We're good people. And for the most part, we are good people. We're really good helping the world in natural disasters. We are good. Damn, we're frustrating. We could be so much better. How can we speak about human rights if we don't talk about ethical consistency? Well, it's not hard to see why a lot of people, including my friends, don't talk politics to me. And I say it in all seriousness. I know it sounds kind of funny, but it's true. Nobody to me anymore, nobody, none of my friends, nobody says to me, what's new? Because I think they weren't going to get an earful if I asked them that question. So most people just say, hi, Rick, and just keep on going. I used to chase after them and go, do you want to hear what's new? But I figured if they want to know, they'll ask me. Well, human rights, to me, I want to get ready to wind this down and certainly entertain your questions, comments, or criticisms. Or should I say, and criticisms. Human rights, to me, is just the central way in which I interact with the world. I hear the world in human rights parlance. I see the world with human rights parlance and words. It's not just an issue. It's the issue. Because to me, it's the central theme of how we interact with each other. Human rights is all about human interaction. Unless you live in solitary confinement in a prison cell or by yourself somewhere where you have no interaction with anybody, everything you do as soon as you start talking to somebody involves human rights. They are the most basic but central questions that affect all of us as human beings, which are the following. How do I want to be treated by people I interact with, whether my friends, my close friends, by people I don't know? How do I want to be interacted with by people who look like me, who don't look like me, who have my faith, who have no faith, who have a different faith? How do I want them to interact with me? And how do I want to interact with them? Do I really in my heart of hearts believe them to be my equal in all ways, or do I not? Or do I not? It's my mother's teachings from day one. Do good, keep doing good, and stop finding reasons not to do good. People are people. The most basic human right of all is not the right to life. That is not the most basic human right. There is one right which is much more important than that, and it is the central theme of human rights, which is the most basic human right of all is the right to life with dignity. And those two words, with dignity, vault the right to life. Because a life without dignity is a life only of existence. But the right to life and recognizing the inherent dignity of everybody at all times, even when they have done the worst thing possible, they still have inherent dignity and rights. They may have to go to prison for what they did, but they don't lose their inherent dignity and rights even because they did something so terrible and possibly even violated other people's rights, as regrettable as that was. And it's that more than anything else which, if she were here or could hear me when I say to my mom, thanks, you at least instilled in me that belief, the idea of human dignity as the central reason why we're here and how we have to treat each other. I again thank Bill and all of y'all for this invite. You know how deeply appreciative I am to have a public opportunity to thank my mom and to thank you for allowing me to do this work in the capacities with you that we can interact. I am just so lucky I can't even convey it to you. Thank you all.